Hello there everyone and welcome to FiST Chat, the vodcast that features discussions on the topics of film, science and technology. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How you doing there, Steve? I hope you're lucid.
I am very lucid. Hello everyone, whether you're lucid or not, whether you're taking drugs for recreational or medical reasons, welcome to FiST Chat.
Absolutely. Welcome everyone. We're on drugs, so if we sound a bit odd or you're not in with the lingo here, this episode is not for you. That's my poor Tony Montana impression there. So, even though they're not really in the same league, we mentioned in a previous episode the caffeine side of things, because we realised that was sort of like the most addictive and used, most addictive. It's an addictive and most used drug on in the planet, but it's a legal substance. So today, when we're talking about recreational drugs, we're going to be talking about a few illicit ones. So hopefully none of you, run for the hills and shout blue murder on what we're going to talk about today, but it's all good. And actually, we might even perhaps warn you against some of them, depending on as we maybe take a step through and have a look at what these things actually do to you. But it's a common thing, isn't it, Steve? You know, humans need stimulants, it would seem. And looking at some of the numbers, they're doing it in surprisingly large amounts, aren't they?
Well, yes. I mean, look, I think all the research shows that people use drugs for a whole load of reasons other than that they were intended. And there's certainly an illicit, or some would call it a recreational sort of drug market. And people choose to, explore alternate realities through drug taking. I think that's a big part of popular culture.
Absolutely. Well, I mentioned to you just before we started, I was a couple of years ago when I was out with a group of friends and happened to meet a guy that were out there, got into this discussion about, taking illicit substances, as you do. And the amusing thing to me that stuck in my mind, and I can still remember it quite clearly, was that he just couldn't understand how I could get through the day without taking some form of drug. And we're talking about an illicit drug to be able to get through the day. And I think it was along the lines of the monotony and the torrid nature of life that he was talking about there.
Well, that's right. He's talking about dulling the edges, is he? I mean, there seem to be a lot of people out there who resort to a whole range of drugs. And we must also remember, it begins with the legal drugs. I'm not saying they're gateways, but, people who sit there sipping a latte and, laughing at the smokers who are all addicts probably don't realise they're probably as addicted to coffee, and they're both drugs that are very, very common. Alcohol, of course, is another one. But then you take a whole step through of a range of drugs on top of that, some of which have medical or at least health applications, and others which are then just completely abused, I guess, for, a way to get high. And, you look at, you were talking about stimulants before. There are, of course, the opiates and cannabinoids, which people are very fond of to slow things down. But then there are the people that like to speed things up with their stimulants. So, there's a huge range.
Well, should we maybe have a look at some examples? I obviously have no personal experience with this, so I have to go through the anecdotal evidence I've been told. Like cannabis, for example. So that's creates a sense of relaxation. Am I on the right track with that? Maybe some euphoria in there as well.
So I hear, Ben. I mean, a lot of these psychoactive drugs in sort of the cannabinoid or opiate sort of class, or the narcotic class, I guess as they're more commonly known, is the way that they actually work is they affect your brain chemistry, and they alter the levels you have of dopamine and serotonin, which are two very common sort of, I guess, and related to feeling good mentally. And it's changing their levels and also changing the way receptors in the brain interact with naturally occurring chemicals and the drug chemicals that you're taking that cause the differences in perception. And so when you see somebody, changing colour or morphing from a animal to human, when you taste music, and when you feel colours. These are all things that some people think are highly enjoyable or experiences. You know, some people might just describe them as psychosis. Either way, you know, people do take these drugs for those sorts of experiences, and a hell of a lot of people seem to enjoy them.
Absolutely. I was reading that it's literally almost a drug of choice, in particular with cannabis. Apparently, there was a survey done in 2008 by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, and found that 6 million Australians older than 14 had tried it at least once.
Yeah, Ben, but some of us didn't exhale.
Exactly. All right, if we move on to a different one, speed being a more
Stimulant,
a stimulant. That's creating feelings of intense pleasure and exhilaration, increases energy levels, enhances confidence, and the best way is to inject it or snort it, because it gives you that instant rush. So I've been told.
Oh, goodness me. Honestly, I don't know. I really hope no one out there in FiST chat land is out there doing it or wants to do that, especially the injecting of drugs. I mean, that's just ridiculous. Any IV use is a medical procedure. Leave it to a doctor. If they want to inject you with speed, then that's probably okay. But you shouldn't be doing it by yourself at home alone. Having said that, though, speed's a very interesting drug. It's a stimulant. Some people, it actually causes a reaction which isn't very pleasant. Sort of overrides their natural systems, and they can actually get not life or death ill, but quite ill afterwards as a response. For most people, though, from what the literature and anecdotal evidence suggests, is people feel all G'd up, they feel all nice and fast, they talk fast, they wave their arms around the air like this, and have a great time. You know, it is highly addictive in that people don't want to come down, and particularly with a number of these highs, the come down where your brain chemistry is out of balance is quite unpleasant, and that will lead people to go on binges, you know, sometimes for days until they actually crash. And it's one of the reasons that in terms of mental health, Tuesdays are a very bad day for people who take drugs on the weekend. Normally, if they do a full weekend, Sunday they're sort of starting to come down. Maybe they'll stay up, but by Monday and Tuesday they're bottoming out. And that's
definitely no good, is it?
The higher you go, the further you've got to fall.
Absolutely. Well, again, just with some of the stats in Australia, it seems around 1 in 10 people over 14 have tried it, which is a fairly high number. It's incredible, really, because maybe that's just a function of how things are, but you don't know, because it's sort of, you know, in the back room kind of thing. You don't necessarily see it unless you know, at least, like, say, for example, you're living in Melbourne, where I am, and you happen to be if you happen to be going late at night through some of the streets in the city, you might see a few interesting little scenarios occurring there.
Well, the interesting thing is that the use of drugs like speed, you know, they're very popular, and they're just an extension of caffeine, although the difference with speed is actually psychoactive. So, you know, people will take it for those reasons. And, it's one of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Cocaine, obviously, another one that's used. Obviously, made famous in Scarface. If we're talking film here, the old Tony Montana thing, becoming king of the cocaine empire. It's again, it's a fairly serious thing. You know, you see the cliched things in movies of the, you know, the plastic white pouches full of the white magic powder that gets sold. And when you think about it in terms of real life and where people are and all that sort of thing, it's just it's amazing that these things sort of are so accessible if you know where to look for them.
Well, the interesting thing about cocaine is that it can actually, if it's applied topically, can actually be used as an analgesic as well as giving you a high. And I mean, dentists used it, I think, probably up until 1910 or 1920s. And interestingly, I was actually going to say it about amphetamine before. You could actually buy amphetamine off the shelf at a chemist only 20 years ago in Australia. Yeah. So, you know, when you think about these things, a lot of these drugs, you know, and we'll be talking about ecstasy soon, I'm sure, you know, actually available quite freely up until the last 20 years, and very often they had a subculture of their own well before they entered the mainstream, and people started realising that they had cheap pharmaceutical-grade drugs that they could abuse.
Well, you mentioned ecstasy. Do you want to take us through that one?
Well, ecstasy is a really interesting drug in that it's both a stimulant but also has psychoactive properties similar to, probably drugs like mescaline and LSD. So it not only stimulates and fires you up like speed would, but it also alters your perception on, visually and orally of what you're seeing and or what's around you. But that was a drug that was, basically discovered in 1912, I think it was. I think it was by the Merck brothers as they were looking for, I don't know, I've heard dietary supplements, I've heard, or dietary suppressant probably would make sense with stimulant aspect, but also as a blood thinner or blood clotting, anti-clotting agent. And, that existed and that could be bought off the shelves. And throughout the 60s and 70s in the UK, for instance, doctors were actually prescribing those pills for depressed housewives. And that was how the pills came onto the dance scene. So can you imagine in 40 years ago, all these bored, depressed housewives popping these pills and enjoying their daytime soaps more than anyone could imagine, so that their kids decided to munch on some of those pills and go dancing.
Unbelievable. I mean, you could almost imagine just like the story, if you track back like the stories of where all of these drugs came from, how they were created and whatever, and what they've ended up sort of what they've become and what they're being used for. It's almost amazing, isn't it?
Oh, look, very often the stories behind the discoveries of drugs, and particularly medical drugs as well, LSD is another one, absolutely, they're great stories, but, by and large, the stories seem to centre more on, leaving Las Vegas style story.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, how you were saying that all of these drugs have an effect on the brain, and it did bring me back to thinking about caffeine as well. How you were saying that how could coffee drinkers be thinking that laughing at people who are smoking, that sort of thing. All of these substances sort of have that effect on the brain, and they actually, in effect, what they're really doing is sort of it's creating. If it's a stimulant in that case, it's creating a false sense of energy for the body, isn't it? It's basically doing performing that sort of role.
Well, it depends. You see, the interesting thing is that caffeine. That's why caffeine I wouldn't particularly recommend as a stimulant for activity. Maybe mentally in the short term, but its physiological effect over the whole body isn't actually as effective as speed, which is actually psychoactive. By far the most effective drug in that class is nicotine, because not only does it make more mentally alert, but it also stimulates blood flow to muscle fibres.
Yeah.
So you actually get an all-over benefit from nicotine. And I have heard it described before that if you didn't have to take it through smoking, or if you didn't access the nicotine through smoking, nicotine would probably be the best drug for humans, or the most beneficial drug for humans.
All right. Well, in that case, we'll have to either take our nicotine patches, chew the gum, or light up a few cigarettes after the app.
Well, this is the one thing, Ben. Yeah, sure, a little bit of nicotine would be great, just like a little bit of caffeine is. But you don't want to get addicted. The more addicted, or I shouldn't say addicted, the greater the usage, the less effective. You have to take more, and then really, what you're actually doing is negating all the benefits, and that's what you have to remember. So even if you are a recreational drug user, or you put yourself in that class, the less you use the drugs, the better it is, not only for your health, but for the fact that you will get a better response, or a response that you're looking for a lot easier. I mean, God knows who wants to have to, cram a whole box full of pills in their mouth just to get a smile.
No, not good at all. Not good at all. Oh, well, that's probably a good place to finish up. So thanks again, Steve, for the chat. Always interesting, and we'll have more on this topic, I'm sure, in the future.
Absolutely. Tweet and let us know if you want us to go into more depth on how these drugs work, or you just like the stats and that side of it. And check out our blogs, which in their own way, highly amusing.
Absolutely. So don't forget, our website is available at www.fistchat.com. All our links are there to all our content, so hope you enjoy it and peruse and do all that sort of thing. So that's it for this week's episode. So until then, we'll catch you next week.